I sat across from my family at one of the most exclusive five-star restaurants in Boston. My mother slid a check for $50,000 across the crisp white tablecloth, her lips curled into a condescending smirk. "We sold your grandfather's coastal wasteland for $8 million," she announced loudly enough for neighboring tables to hear. "Your brother Trent needs the capital for his new tech company. Take this 50 grand and pay your rent, little accountant." I looked at the check then, at my brother's smug face, and I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I took a sip of my wine and calmly revealed a secret I had been keeping for 14 years. "The deed you just sold to that massive real estate developer is a complete forgery. My name is Naomi. I am 32 years old and I work as a forensic accountant. Before I tell you how my family's greed led to 89 desperate missed calls the very next morning, and an FBI investigation, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe toxic family members deserve exactly what is coming to them." Growing up in our affluent Massachusetts suburb, I was always the invisible child. My parents, Richard and Diane, were obsessed with appearances, country club memberships, and projecting an image of flawless wealth. But their true masterpiece, the absolute center of their universe, was my older brother, Trent. Trent is 35 years old now, and he has never worked a hard day in his entire life. He was the golden boy, the handsome athlete who was supposed to become a titan of industry. I was just the quiet, analytical daughter who preferred math puzzles to beauty pageants. My mother constantly reminded me that I lacked the charisma to be truly successful. She called my career choice boring frequently, telling her friends that I was just a glorified human calculator. This dinner was supposed to be their ultimate victory lap. My parents had summoned me to this ridiculously overpriced steakhouse under the guise of a family reunion. Trent sat across from me, swirling an expensive glass of bourbon, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than my first car. He was radiating an unearned arrogance. His wife, Jada, was noticeably absent away on a business trip. Jada is a stunning, fiercely intelligent black woman who works as a high-powered public relations executive. She is entirely out of Trent's league. I always knew Trent was deeply insecure about making less money than his brilliant African-American wife, which explained his constant, desperate need to launch fake startup companies to prove his worth. My mother tapped her manicured fingernail against the $50,000 check resting near my water glass. "Take it, Naomi," she urged, her voice dripping with fake maternal concern. "We know how much you struggle on your modest little salary. Your father and I handled all the heavy lifting with the real estate brokers. The land was just sitting there doing nothing. Trent is on the verge of a massive breakthrough with his new app, and the $8 million is exactly the seed money he needs to become a billionaire." I stared at the check, feeling a cold, familiar anger rising in my chest. My grandfather, a tough but loving man who actually saw my potential, had left that prime coastal property in Maine exclusively to me when he passed away. He knew my parents were financially irresponsible. He knew they funneled every spare cent into Trent's countless failed ventures. The property was supposed to be my safety net. I pushed the check back across the table with my index finger. "You are giving me $50,000 out of an $8 million sale for land that belonged to me," I stated flatly. My father, Richard, scoffed, cutting into his rare steak. "Do not be ungrateful, Naomi. We paid for your upbringing. We gave you a roof over your head. You should be thanking us for cutting you in at all. Besides, you are just a desk worker. You do not have the entrepreneurial vision to manage that kind of wealth." I leaned back in my chair, looking at the three of them. The absolute entitlement was suffocating. "I want to talk about my 18th birthday," I said quietly. Trent rolled his eyes and groaned. "Are we really doing this again? Are you still holding a grudge over ancient history?" "It is not ancient history to me, Trent," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "When I turned 18, I was accepted into an elite university program for accounting and finance. I had a college fund that my grandfather set up for me, holding over $120,000. But when I went to the bank to withdraw my first tuition payment, the account was completely empty." My mother waved her hand dismissively. "We needed those funds for a family emergency." "Buying Trent a brand new Porsche 911 is not a family emergency," I fired back. my tone sharpening. You drained my entire college fund so Trent could drive a luxury sports car to a job interview for a hedge fund. An interview he completely failed, by the way. I had to work triple shifts at a greasy diner smelling like old cooking oil and bleach just to afford community college before transferring. I took on massive student debt while Trent crashed that same Porsche into a ditch 6 months later. We made a parental decision, my father barked, his face turning red. Trent needed to project success. In the business world, perception is reality. You were just going to study accounting. You did not need a massive fund to learn how to count other people's money. Now stop throwing a tantrum and take the check. The deal closed yesterday. The funds have already been wired into our accounts. It is done. I looked at the $50,000 check again, and then I let out a soft, genuine laugh. The sound made my mother visibly uncomfortable. She hated when I did not follow her script of submission. You think I am an idiot? I said softly. You think because I am quiet, because I sit at a desk and look at spreadsheets all day, that I do not understand how the world works. But my job is literally tracking financial fraud. I am a forensic accountant. I investigate white-collar criminals, money launderers, and embezzlers for a living. I hunt down people exactly like you. Trent's smug smile began to slip. What are you talking about, you psycho? Just take the money and say thank you. I did not touch the check. Instead, I pulled my phone from my purse and unlocked the screen. The day I went to the bank and found my college fund empty was the most important day of my life. I explained, looking directly into my father's eyes. It taught me that my own parents would gleefully rob me to fund my brother's delusions. It taught me that I had to protect myself because you two would strip me down to the bone if it meant giving Trent another participation trophy. My mother shifted in her seat. Naomi, stop talking in riddles. You are embarrassing us in front of the waitstaff. So the very next morning, the day after my 18th birthday, I drove straight to my grandfather's old estate lawyer. I continued ignoring her completely. I brought the original authentic deed to the coastal property in Maine, the one grandfather gave directly to me, and I legally transferred that property into a federal irrevocable trust. I am the sole trustee and the sole beneficiary. The land cannot be sold, mortgaged, or transferred by anyone without my physical presence, my biometric signature, and the approval of the trust lawyers. The color instantly drained from my father's face. The piece of meat on his fork fell onto his plate with a dull thud. What are you saying? He whispered, his voice suddenly lacking all its previous authority. I am saying that the paperwork you found in the old safe at home is worthless. I smiled, leaning forward. You found a copy of the preliminary land survey from 20 years ago. You hired some shady discount real estate broker who cut corners on the title search. You forged my signature on a fake transfer document to sell the land to Vanguard Horizon Real Estate. You committed felony forgery to sell a property that you do not legally own. Trent practically jumped out of his chair. You are lying. The wire transfer cleared yesterday. We have the $8 million. Oh, the wire transfer cleared because Vanguard Horizon is a massive corporation that moves fast. I agreed calmly. But their legal department does their final deed registration audits at the end of the week. When they file that forged paperwork with the county clerk, it is going to bounce back. The federal trust blocks any unauthorized transfer. They are going to realize they just wired $8 million to a group of con artists. My mother grabbed her chest, struggling to breathe. You transferred it into a trust. 14 years ago. You have been sitting on this for 14 years. I considered it a necessary precaution, I said, finally standing up from the table. I left a $20 bill to cover my glass of wine. You always said I lacked entrepreneurial vision, Dad. But I think securing my assets against family theft was a pretty solid business move. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the $50,000 check sitting on the table. I did not look back. I drove back to my apartment, took a warm shower, and slept more peacefully than I had in years. I knew the explosion was coming, and I was entirely prepared for the fallout. The next morning, I woke up at 7, brewed a fresh cup of coffee, and finally checked my phone. 89 missed calls. 42 from my mother, 30 from my father, and 17 from Trent. There were dozens of voicemails and a stream of frantic text messages that perfectly documented their descent into absolute panic. I listened to the voicemails while I drank my coffee. The first few were from my father, left around midnight, demanding I stop playing games and answer the phone. By 3 in the morning, the tone had shifted. My mother was sobbing hysterically into the receiver, begging me to call her back. But the best voicemail came from Trent at 6 in the morning. His voice was trembling, completely stripped of his usual arrogance. "Naomi, please pick up the phone," Trent begged on the recording, panting as if he was pacing around a room. "Vanguard Horizon's lawyers just woke us up. They are at Mom and Dad's house. They brought police officers. Naomi, you have to fix this. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Please, they are talking about wire fraud." I smiled, taking another sip of my coffee. The dominoes were falling exactly as I knew they would. In the world of high-stakes real estate, corporations do not play around with fraudulent titles. When an $8 million transaction is flagged as a scam, they do not send a polite email. They send a legal strike team. I finally decided to return the call. I dialed my father's number. He answered on the first ring. "Naomi," he shouted, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "You have to get over here right now. You have to dissolve the trust. Tell them you authorized the sale." "Why would I lie to federal investigators?" "Dad," I asked cheerfully. "I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on ethical financial reporting. Lying about a forged deed would ruin my professional credibility." "You do not understand," my mother shrieked in the background, grabbing the phone from my father. "They want the money back right now. They are threatening to freeze our accounts, Naomi. You have to sign the property over to them to satisfy the contract. We are your parents." I set my coffee mug down. "Then just give them the $8 million back, Mom. You just got the wire transfer yesterday. Return the funds, apologize for the forgery, and maybe they will not press criminal charges." There was a dead, horrifying silence on the other end of the line. The silence was so thick, I could practically hear their heartbeats racing. "We cannot." My mother finally whispered, her voice breaking into an ugly, guttural sob. "What do you mean you cannot?" I asked, my forensic accounting instincts immediately kicking in. "It has been less than 24 hours. Trent took his share immediately," my father said, sounding like a defeated, broken old man. "He took $3 million. He said he needed to secure assets for his tech company, but the corporate lawyers just ran a trace on the funds. Trent did not invest in a tech company, Naomi. He paid off massive underground gambling debts. And he bought a luxury mansion in cash yesterday afternoon to surprise Jada. The money is gone. It is locked up in offshore creditors and a closed real estate transaction. We cannot give the $8 million back." I closed my eyes, shaking my head at the sheer magnitude of their stupidity. Trent had always been desperate to impress his wife, Jada. Jada was a highly successful, independent African-American woman who had built her own PR empire from scratch. She thought Trent was a legitimate entrepreneur because my parents constantly covered up his failures. Trent spent every waking moment terrified she would realize he was a fraud. So the second he got his hands on $3 million of stolen money, he used it to wipe away his secret gambling addiction and buy a mansion to maintain his fake billionaire persona to his own wife. "You guys are unbelievable," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, cold whisper. "You stole from me to fund a gambling addict." "Naomi, please," my mother wailed into the phone, completely hysterical now. "The lawyers are sitting in our living room. They said if the $8 million is not returned by the end of the business day, they are calling the FBI. This crosses state lines. It is federal wire fraud. You have to give them the land. If you do not dissolve that trust, your father and I are going to prison. You are a cold-blooded monster." I listened to her desperate insults, feeling absolutely nothing but vindication. I walked over to my window, looking out at the beautiful morning sun shining over Nashville. "Let me explain the law to you, Mom, since you clearly did not consult an attorney before committing a felony," I said sharply, adopting my most professional, clinical tone. "Under Title 18 of the United States Code Section 1343, wire fraud carries a penalty of up to 20 years in federal prison. Forgery of a real estate deed to facilitate that fraud will add consecutive sentencing. You did this to yourselves. You chose Trent over me for 32 years, and now Trent is the one who is going to put you behind bars. Naomi, I am begging you. My father cried out the authority he had wielded over me, my entire life completely shattered. We are your family. My family died the day you stole my college fund to buy a Porsche, I replied coldly. I suggest you look up the dress code for federal inmates. Better get used to wearing orange, Mom. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked their numbers. The first stage of their destruction was complete, but I knew my brother Trent well enough to know he would not go down without a fight. He would try to drag someone else down with him to save his own skin. And I had a very strong suspicion about who his next victim was going to be. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked their numbers. The first stage of their destruction was complete, but I knew my brother Trent well enough to know he would not go down without a fight. He would try to drag someone else down with him to save his own skin. And I had a very strong suspicion about who his next victim was going to be. I walked into my home office, set my coffee down on the glass desk, and fired up my triple-monitor workstation. As a forensic accountant, I do not rely on emotion or intuition. I rely on paper trails, digital footprints, and the absolute certainty of mathematics. Numbers are completely incapable of lying, and my family left a trail of financial breadcrumbs so wide a blindfolded amateur could follow it. I logged into my secure access portals, pulling up public property records, corporate registries, and county clerk databases. I needed to see exactly how Trent had managed to intercept $3 million of stolen real estate funds without triggering an immediate federal hold. It did not take long to find the answer, and when I did, my blood ran absolutely cold. Trent has not had a clean credit score in over a decade. He is a walking financial disaster, drowning in sports betting losses and failed business loans. There was no way a major title company or a corporate entity like Vanguard Horizon would wire millions of dollars directly into a personal checking account owned by a man with a credit rating in the low 500s. He had to have used a shell company, and he had to have used someone with a pristine financial background as the guarantor. I pulled the public deed for the luxury mansion Trent had just purchased in cash yesterday afternoon. The buyer was listed as Horizon PR Holdings, LLC. My jaw clenched. Horizon PR Holdings. Trent did not use his own name. He used his wife's credentials. Jada is a brilliant self-made black woman who built her public relations empire from a single laptop into a multi-million-dollar agency. She is sophisticated, powerful, and fiercely independent. My parents have always harbored a quiet, toxic resentment toward her. Diane and Richard would smile at Jada during Thanksgiving dinners, happily drinking the expensive wine she brought while making passive-aggressive comments about her ambition behind her back. They could not stand that Trent, their precious golden child, was completely financially dependent on a successful African-American woman. Trent fed off that same insecurity. He desperately wanted to be the provider, the billionaire tech genius, to mask the fact that he was essentially a glorified freeloader living in Jada's shadow. I quickly ran a corporate trace on Horizon PR Holdings, LLC. The managing director was listed as Jada. The electronic signature on the incorporation documents belonged to Jada. The receiving bank account that accepted the stolen wire transfer from Vanguard Horizon was a corporate account registered entirely under Jada's Social Security number. Trent had not just committed wire fraud. He had committed aggravated identity theft against his own wife. He hijacked Jada's verified corporate banking relationships to bypass the federal Know Your Customer regulations. He knew the bank would not flag a $3 million wire transfer going into an account associated with a highly successful public relations executive. He forged her digital signature on the LLC creation documents, routed the stolen money into an account bearing her name, and then immediately authorized a cashier's check to buy the mansion. He was setting her up to take the fall. If Vanguard Horizon reported the fraud to the FBI, the federal agents would follow the money. And the money pointed directly, unequivocally to Jada. Trent was constructing a perfect airtight scapegoat. To confirm my theory, I needed internal communications. My parents and Trent are arrogant, but they are also incredibly incompetent when it comes to technology. Years ago, my mother demanded I set up a family cloud storage account so she could easily share vacation photos. They all synced their phones to the same cloud drive. I was the administrator, and because they literally threw me out of their lives, they never bothered to change the passwords or remove my access. I opened a new tab, bypassed the outdated security protocols, and accessed the synced text message logs from Trent's phone. The messages were updating in real time. I clicked on a group chat titled Family Emergency, which included Trent, Richard, and Diane. The messages I read made me physically sick to my stomach. Trent had texted them just 20 minutes after I hung up the phone with them. "Dad, the Vanguard lawyers are giving us until 5 p.m., Trent wrote. But we do not have to panic. I structured the wire transfer through an LLC I opened under Jada's name. I used her DocuSign account for the closing paperwork on the mansion. If the feds get involved, the paper trail shows Jada orchestrated the transaction." My father Richard replied 2 minutes later. "Are you sure she will not find out before we can figure a way out of this? She is at a marketing conference in Chicago until tomorrow." Trent texted back. "Look, she works in PR and makes plenty of money. She can take the financial hit. Let her take the debt. She is totally clueless about finance anyway. She just signs whatever I put in front of her. She loves me. If the feds show up, we just say she handled the real estate deal for my tech company. She has the capital to pay the settlement and keep us all out of jail." My mother Diane chimed in shortly after. "Trent is right, Richard. Jada makes millions. She is always talking about supporting her husband. Well, now she can prove it. This is what marriage is about. She will take the fall, pay the fine, and your son stays out of prison." I sat back in my ergonomic office chair staring at the glowing monitors, utterly repulsed by the people who shared my DNA. They were not just going to let an innocent woman take the blame for a federal felony. They were actively celebrating it. They viewed Jada as nothing more than a convenient human shield, a wealthy black woman they could exploit to protect their mediocre, gambling-addicted son. Trent was perfectly willing to let the FBI raid his wife's office, destroy her immaculate public relations firm, and potentially send her to federal prison just so he could avoid taking responsibility for his own pathetic failures. Trent was right about one thing. Jada trusted him. She loved him. She worked 80-hour weeks building her company, securing high-profile clients and managing crises for major brands. When she came home, she wanted a sanctuary. She likely handed Trent the basic household financial duties because she thought they were a team. She never in a million years would have suspected that her husband was secretly using her verified digital identity to launder millions of dollars in stolen real estate funds. But Trent was dead wrong about something else. Jada is not clueless. She is a master of optics, crisis management, and strategic warfare. If she knew she was being attacked, she would burn the entire battlefield to the ground. I printed every single document on my screens. The forged LLC incorporation papers, the wire transfer receipts, the property deed for the new mansion bearing Jada's forged signature. And most importantly, I printed high-resolution screenshots of the group chat where Trent, Richard, and Diane explicitly conspired to frame her for a federal crime. I arranged the papers, meticulously placing them into a thick black leather binder. As a forensic accountant, I build cases that prosecutors use to destroy white-collar criminals. This binder was a lethal weapon fully loaded and ready to detonate. I checked the time. It was 9 in the morning. Trent mentioned Jada was at a marketing conference in Chicago, but I knew Jada's schedule better than Trent did. Jada and I followed each other on social media. She had posted an update late last night saying her Chicago conference ended early, and she was taking a red-eye flight back to Nashville to surprise her husband. She was already back in the city. She was likely at her downtown corporate office right now, catching up on emails before heading home to the very husband who was currently plotting her legal demise. I grabbed the black binder, slid it into my briefcase, and grabbed my car keys. My parents and Trent thought they had found the perfect exit strategy. They thought they could sacrifice Jada to the federal authorities and walk away completely clean. They underestimated Jada and they completely forgot about me. I walked out of my apartment, the satisfying click of the deadbolt echoing in the quiet hallway. I was about to introduce my sister-in-law to the real Trent, and I knew exactly what kind of destruction a betrayed PR executive could unleash. It was time to go hunting. The drive into downtown Nashville took exactly 22 minutes, giving me plenty of time to mentally prepare for the hurricane I was about to unleash. As I navigated the morning traffic, my mind automatically cataloged the sheer volume of financial crimes my brother had committed in the span of a single afternoon. Being a forensic accountant means I do not just look at where the money went. I look at how it moved, who authorized it, and what systemic vulnerabilities were exploited along the way. Trent had been busy, very busy. Before leaving my apartment, I had dug deeper into his offshore activities. The $3 million from the Vanguard Horizon real estate theft was just the tip of the iceberg. I traced a web of transactions linking his personal devices to a series of sports betting syndicates based in the Cayman Islands. I found the digital footprint of a massive home equity line of credit, a HELOC taken out against Jada's primary residence just last month. Trent had forged her signature on the bank loan applications, siphoning out hundreds of thousands of dollars to cover his previous gambling losses, all while telling Jada he was busy coding his revolutionary new app. He was bleeding her dry from the inside out, and the Vanguard theft was his desperate, sloppy attempt to cover his tracks before she noticed the missing funds. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the sleek, glass-fronted high-rise that housed Horizon Public Relations. Jada had leased the entire top floor. She had built this agency with her own brilliance, navigating a ruthless corporate world to become one of the most powerful Black executives in the city. She represented A-list celebrities, major tech firms, and national politicians. Her reputation was flawless. Her brand was built on integrity and crisis management. And her pathetic excuse for a husband was about to drag her name through the federal mud. I stepped out of the elevator and walked into the immaculate reception area. The Horizon PR logo was emblazoned in brushed steel on the wall behind a massive marble desk. The receptionist looked up, offering a polished smile. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "I am Jada's sister-in-law," I replied, not breaking my stride as I walked past her desk toward the corner office. "It is a family emergency." The receptionist stood up, calling after me, but I was already pushing open the heavy glass door to Jada's private suite. Jada sat behind her expansive desk, looking like a magazine cover in a tailored emerald green suit. She was reviewing a stack of marketing proofs, a cup of black coffee steaming next to her. When the door swung open, she looked up, her sharp, intelligent eyes narrowing in surprise. "Naomi," Jada said, setting her pen down. She glanced past me at her hovering receptionist and gave a subtle nod to let the woman know it was fine. The door clicked shut, leaving us alone. "What are you doing here?" Jada asked, her tone guarded but polite. "Trent told me you had a massive falling out with Richard and Diane at dinner last night. He said you caused quite a scene." "Of course he did," I said, walking over to her desk and dropping the heavy black leather binder directly onto her marketing proofs. The thud echoed in the spacious office. "I am sure he told you I was being unreasonable, emotional, and jealous of his sudden miraculous tech funding." Jada crossed her arms, leaning back in her leather chair. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. "Actually, yes. He called me this morning in an absolute panic. He said you were threatening to sabotage his seed money because you are holding on to some childhood grudge about a car your parents bought him 14 years ago." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "He is terrified, Jada. But he is not terrified of me sabotaging his business. He is terrified because the FBI is about to kick down the doors of this beautiful agency and walk you out of here in handcuffs." Jada stared at me for a long moment, and then she let out a dismissive sigh. She reached for her coffee. "Naomi, I do not have time for family drama today. I just flew in on a red-eye from Chicago. I have 3 major client crises to manage, and I am not getting involved in whatever toxic dynamic you have going on with your parents." Trent finally secured his backing. Let him have his moment. "He does not have backing," I said, my voice dropping to a dead serious pitch. "He has a felony, and he used your name to commit it. Open the binder, Jada." She did not move. "You have always been jealous of him. Diane warned me about this when Trent and I got married. She said you could not stand seeing anyone else in the family happy. You sit in your cubicle crunching numbers, and you resent Trent for actually taking risks and building things. He is not building anything, I fired back, slapping my hand flat against the leather cover of the binder. He is stealing. He stole from me. He stole from a commercial real estate developer, and he is stealing from you. I am a forensic accountant, Jada. My entire job is dismantling financial lies. Do you really think I would walk into your office, risk a harassment charge, and put this binder on your desk if I did not have absolute mathematically proven facts? Jada's confident posture wavered just a fraction of an inch. She looked down at the black binder, then back up at me. Her jaw tightened. Open it, I commanded. Slowly, she uncrossed her arms and flipped the cover open. The first page was the corporate registry for Horizon PR Holdings, LLC. Jada frowned, scanning the document. I did not open this LLC. My holding company is registered in Delaware, not Tennessee. I know, I said, pointing to the bottom of the page. Look at the managing director's signature. Look at the DocuSign stamp. It is my signature. Jada murmured, her brow furrowing in confusion. But I did not sign this. Look at the IP address and the timestamp on the digital certificate, I instructed, tapping my finger against the highlighted text. It was signed yesterday at 2 in the afternoon. Where were you yesterday at 2 in the afternoon, Jada? I was on a stage in Chicago giving a keynote address to 500 people, she said, her voice growing quieter. Exactly, I replied. Now look at the geolocation tag attached to that IP address. It maps directly to my parents' router in their living room. Trent forged your signature using your verified digital credentials while he was sitting on his mother's couch. Jada swallowed hard, turning to the next page. It was the Vanguard Horizon wire transfer receipt for $3 million routed directly into a bank account opened under the fake LLC. What is this? She asked, her eyes darting across the staggering numbers. Trent told me his venture capital firm wired his first round of funding this morning. That is not venture capital, I explained coldly. My parents forged a deed to a massive piece of coastal property that my grandfather left exclusively to me. They sold it to Vanguard Horizon for $8 million. But I locked that land in an irrevocable trust 14 years ago. The deed they sold is a fake. Vanguard Horizon is currently realizing they have been scammed. And Trent managed to intercept $3 million of those stolen funds by routing it into an account bearing your social security number. Jada shook her head, pushing the binder away. No, Trent would not do that. He would not involve me in something illegal. He loves me. You are manipulating these documents. You doctored this to get back at your parents. Turn to page 4, I said, completely ignoring her denial. I knew this was the hardest part. Breaking through the illusion of a happy marriage is like shattering bulletproof glass. You have to hit it with something heavy. Jada reluctantly turned the page. She stared at the bank statements from her own primary residence. He took out a home equity line of credit against my house, she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. $300,000, I confirmed, 2 months ago. He forged your signature on that, too. And if you turn to page 5, you will see exactly where that money went. Jada flipped the page. I had printed out the offshore routing numbers matching them to a well-known sports betting syndicate in the Cayman Islands. I had also included copies of Trent's hidden cryptocurrency wallets showing massive sustained losses over the past 36 months. He does not have a tech startup, Jada. He does not know how to code. He does not have venture capitalists knocking on his door. He is a severe gambling addict. He has been using your wealth, your credit, and your pristine reputation to fund his addiction. Lies! Jada snapped, standing up from her desk, her chair rolling backward and hitting the glass wall. You are a liar, Naomi. Trent is my husband. He is building our future. He just bought us a new house yesterday. He surprised me with the deed this morning. It is a massive estate in Belle Meade. I looked at her with profound pity. The mansion in Belle Meade, the ultimate prize he bought to keep her blind to his failures. Turn to page 7, Jada. She stood frozen for a second, breathing heavily before she reached down and flipped to the last section of the binder. She stared at the property deed for the Belle Meade mansion. He bought it in cash, I explained softly, using the $3 million of stolen Vanguard Horizon money, And look at the name of the buyer on the deed. Jada stared at the highlighted text. Her hands began to shake. He put the stolen house in your fake LLC's name, I said, delivering the final crushing blow. He did not buy you a gift, Jada. He bought you a federal indictment. When Vanguard Horizon tracks their stolen money, they will see that a highly successful PR executive used her corporate accounts to receive stolen funds and then immediately used those funds to buy a luxury mansion to hide the assets. It is textbook money laundering. Jada's legs seemed to give out. She sank slowly back into her chair, her eyes glued to the documents. The denial was vanishing, replaced by a horrifying, suffocating realization. But I had one more piece of evidence. The one piece that would ensure she did not just believe me, but that she would join me in burning them all to the ground. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the screenshots of the family group chat from this morning, and placed the screen directly on top of the binder. I still have access to their synced cloud drive, I told her. Read what your loving husband texted his parents 2 hours ago. Read exactly what he thinks of you. Jada leaned forward. I watched her eyes track back and forth as she read Trent's words. I watched her read how he called her clueless about finance. I watched her read his brilliant plan to let her take the fall, pay the settlement, and go to prison so he could stay free. I watched her read my mother's words celebrating the fact that the wealthy black woman was going to take the bullet for their golden boy. The silence in the office was absolute. The air felt heavy, charged with a sudden lethal energy. I waited for the tears. I waited for her to break down, to cry over her shattered marriage, to mourn the man she thought she loved. But Jada did not cry. She slowly pushed the phone back toward me. She closed the black leather binder, aligning its edges perfectly parallel with the edge of her desk. She took a deep, steadying breath, adjusting the cuffs of her emerald green blazer. When she finally looked up at me, the warmth in her eyes was entirely gone. They were cold, calculating, and ruthlessly sharp. She reached over and pressed a button on her intercom. "Cancel all my meetings for the rest of the week," Jada told her receptionist, her voice perfectly smooth and unwavering. "And get my lead corporate attorney on a secure line immediately." Jada released the intercom button and looked at me, a dangerous, beautiful smile forming on her lips. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the leather binder. "He thinks I am going to be his human shield," Jada said softly, her voice dripping with venom. "He thinks my money is his personal bailout fund." She stood up, picking up the binder and tucking it under her arm. "I am going to freeze every single asset bearing his name," Jada stated, walking around the desk to stand right in front of me. "I am going to lock him out of the accounts. I am going to file for divorce by noon. And then you and I are going to hand this entire file to the Federal Bureau of Investigation on a silver platter." I smiled back at her, feeling a surge of profound respect. "Let us go catch some criminals," I said. Jada did not waste a single second. She dropped the binder back onto the desk and immediately pivoted to her dual-screen monitor setup. Her manicured fingers flew across the keyboard with lethal precision. "If Vanguard Horizon's legal team is already sitting in your parents' living room, we have a very narrow window before the federal authorities freeze every asset attached to my name," Jada stated. Her eyes locked on the screen. "Trent used my corporate identity to catch the stolen $8 million, but we need to see exactly what else he has infected." I moved to stand behind her shoulder, slipping right back into my role as a forensic investigator. "Start with your primary operating accounts," I advised. "Cut his access to everything. Revoke his authorized user status on all credit lines, freeze the joint checking, and lock down the HELOC he opened against your house." Jada nodded, dialing her private banking concierge on speakerphone while simultaneously navigating her online portals. Within 5 minutes, she had systematically dismantled Trent's financial lifeline. She canceled his platinum cards, froze the joint accounts, and placed a hard fraud alert on her entire Social Security number. Watching a powerful public relations executive handle a crisis in real time was a masterclass in absolute efficiency. Jada answered every security question without hesitation, her voice crisp and commanding. "The joint accounts are locked," Jada said, ending the call with her banker. "He cannot withdraw a single cent to buy a cup of coffee, let alone fund a private jet to flee the state." She took a deep breath, her gaze shifting to the secondary monitor. "Now, Let us check my personal retirement portfolios. I have been maxing out my contributions since I started this agency. I want to make sure my long-term assets are untouched. I watched the screen as she logged into her primary wealth management portal. The loading icon spun for a fraction of a second. When the dashboard finally materialized, the numbers on the screen hit me like a physical blow. Jada stopped breathing. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, completely frozen. The balance on her primary retirement account, a 401k, that should have held well over $2 million of hard-earned wealth, displayed a devastatingly low number: $12,000. Naomi Jada whispered, her voice devoid of all its previous command. Where is my money? Where is my retirement? I leaned in closer, my eyes darting across the transaction history. The forensic accountant inside me immediately recognized the pattern of destruction. I clicked on the Recent Withdrawal tab, pulling up the digital paperwork that accompanied the massive drain of funds. He liquidated it, I said, my voice tight with disgust. Look at this date, Jada. 3 weeks ago, he requested a full hardship withdrawal and a massive loan against the principal balance. But that is impossible, Jada argued, shaking her head. Her composure was cracking, the reality of the betrayal seeping into her bones. I am the sole owner of that account. Federal law requires spousal consent for any withdrawal of that magnitude. He would need a notarized signature from me to touch those funds. I pointed to the digital attachment linked to the withdrawal request. He did not just forge your signature on the Vanguard Horizon real estate deal, Jada. He forged your signature on a spousal consent waiver. He likely hired a fraudulent notary or bribed someone to stamp the paperwork. He drained your entire life savings to pay off his offshore gambling syndicate before they came to break his legs. Jada stared at the screen. The sheer magnitude of Trent's deception hung heavy in the air. This was not just a desperate man trying to cover a mistake. This was a calculated, predatory financial assassination. Trent had systematically dismantled the wealth of a successful, brilliant black woman who had trusted him completely. He had taken the security she had worked 80-hour weeks to build and tossed it into the void of an illegal sports betting ring. I stepped back, bracing myself for the inevitable emotional collapse. I fully expected Jada to break down. Losing millions of dollars and realizing your husband is a sociopathic thief is enough to destroy anyone. I waited for the tears, for the screaming, for the sheer despair to take over. I had seen plenty of victims of financial fraud completely unravel in my office when confronted with the truth. But Jada did not cry. She did not scream. She slowly closed the browser window. She reached down and smoothed out a non-existent wrinkle in her emerald green skirt. When she turned her chair to face me, her posture was entirely rigid, and her eyes were dark, bottomless pits of pure, calculating rage. She had bypassed sorrow entirely and landed squarely on vengeance. She was a woman who had built an empire from the ground up, and she possessed the exact kind of ruthless clarity required to destroy anyone who threatened it. He thinks he can strip me down to nothing, Jada said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. He thinks because I loved him, I will just roll over and accept the debt while he plays the victim. He honestly believes he can use my hard work as his personal bailout fund. She picked up her cell phone and unlocked the screen, bringing up her contacts list. I am going to call my divorce lawyer right now, Jada stated, looking at me with a gaze so sharp it could cut through steel. I am filing for a contested high-asset divorce based on egregious financial fraud and identity theft. I am going to make sure the judge knows exactly where every single stolen penny went. She dialed the number, holding the phone away from her ear as it rang, her eyes never leaving mine. Naomi, Jada said, her voice ringing with absolute, unshakable authority. Let us put this absolute scum in prison together. Jada hung up the phone with her divorce attorney and immediately wiped any trace of anger from her flawless face. The transformation was terrifyingly brilliant. She was no longer a betrayed wife. She was a public relations mastermind preparing for the most critical crisis management campaign of her entire career. She understood the assignment perfectly. We needed them to feel safe, confident, and utterly arrogant right up until the steel trap snapped shut around their ankles. Trent honestly believed he had bought himself 48 hours. Vanguard Horizon's legal team had issued a deadline to return the $8 million, but corporate bureaucracy always moves slower than criminal justice. Trent had likely fed their lawyers a fabricated story about a bank routing error or a clerical delay promising the stolen funds would be wired back by Monday morning. He was playing a dangerous game of financial chicken, assuming he could hustle enough investors over the weekend to cover his tracks. That arrogance led to the most absurd, deeply psychotic event I have ever witnessed in my entire life. It was Saturday night. The Belle Meade Mansion, a sprawling estate of white brick and manicured gardens, bought entirely with stolen money, glowed like a beacon of fraud against the dark Tennessee sky. I sat parked in my unremarkable sedan, 3 blocks away, my laptop glowing in the passenger seat, tethered to a secure mobile hotspot. Jada and I had synchronized our game plan. She was inside the mansion playing the role of the devoted, clueless wife. I was outside acting as her digital overwatch. Trent had spared no expense. He hired a team of valets to park the Porsches and Mercedes of his guests. He booked a classical string quartet and a high-end catering service serving Wagyu beef sliders and Dom Perignon. He was burning through the last remaining thousands of dollars he had siphoned from Jada's retirement accounts to fund a fake billionaire lifestyle. He had invited Nashville's most prominent angel investors, tech venture capitalists, and wealthy local socialites. His goal was painfully obvious to a forensic accountant like me. He needed to pitch his non-existent tech app, secure massive investments tonight, and use that new cash to pay back Vanguard Horizon before the federal authorities knocked down his door on Monday. It was a classic Ponzi scheme dynamic, robbing Peter to pay Paul. My phone buzzed with a secure text message from Jada, who was updating me from the master bathroom. "They are serving caviar on silver platters," Jada wrote. "Trent is wearing a custom velvet tuxedo jacket. Diane is telling the wives of 2 state senators that Trent just secured an $8 million valuation. The delusion is staggering." I typed back quickly, my fingers flying across the screen. "Let him talk. The higher he climbs, the harder the concrete feels when he hits rock bottom." "Who is he pitching right now?" "A venture capitalist named Harrison Caldwell," Jada replied. "Trent is asking for a $5 million seed investment for his app." I immediately turned to my laptop and typed Harrison Caldwell into my database. He was a legitimate investor, a self-made millionaire known for backing emerging tech startups. I could not let Trent steal $5 million from an innocent investor to cover a felony. I compiled a fast encrypted dossier containing the public records of Trent's massive gambling debts, his horrific credit score, and a technical analysis proving his app had 0 functional source code. I routed the file through a proxy server to mask my identity and emailed it directly to Caldwell's executive assistant with a high-priority red flag. While I worked outside, the psychological warfare continued inside the mansion. Jada kept her phone recording inside her designer clutch as she navigated the party. My mother Diane, draped in diamond jewelry that she likely bought on a credit card she could not afford to pay off, cornered Jada near the ice sculpture. "Jada, sweetheart, we are so glad you are here supporting Trent," Diane cooed, sipping her champagne. "He has been under so much pressure lately managing all this wealth." Jada smiled her brilliant camera-ready smile. "He works so hard, Diane. I am just amazed at how quickly he put this house purchase together." Diane leaned in closer, adopting a tone of fake conspiratorial sympathy. "Between us, his sister Naomi has completely lost her mind. We had to cut her off financially because she was demanding a cut of Trent's new company. She even threatened to call the police with some insane story about a fake real estate deed. Can you imagine the jealousy? She is having a complete mental breakdown." Jada did not flinch. She maintained her polished facade, perfectly playing exactly into my mother's towering ego. "That sounds terrible, Diane. Trent handles all the heavy lifting with the finances. I just sign where he tells me to. I am so lucky to have a husband who takes care of the complex business details. I would not even know how to read a property deed." Diane beamed, completely falling for the trap. "Exactly, Trent is a financial genius. You just keep focusing on your little PR agency and let Trent handle the multi-million-dollar deals. He bought this house just for you using his own capital. Is it not wonderful?" It is unbelievable, Jada replied, her voice dripping with a double meaning that Diane was entirely too narcissistic to catch. Truly, I cannot wait to see how he pays for it. Across the grand ballroom, Harrison Caldwell checked his smartphone. His assistant had just forwarded my encrypted dossier. Through the sheer floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Caldwell's face drop. He stared at his phone, then looked up at Trent with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. Caldwell excused himself, abruptly set his crystal champagne flute down on a passing waiter's tray, and walked straight out the front door. Trent chased after him, sweating visibly through his expensive velvet jacket. "Harrison, wait," Trent called out, his voice cracking with panic. "We have not discussed the equity split." Caldwell waved him off without a single word, got into the back of his waiting town car, and sped down the driveway. Jada texted me the play-by-play. Caldwell just bolted. Trent is hyperventilating in the kitchen with Richard and Diane. They are terrified. They still need $8 million by Monday or they are going to prison. Watch your back, I texted her immediately. Desperate people do reckless things. He is going to try to leverage your agency assets. I knew my brother. Without an angel investor to scam, he only had one massive pool of capital left to exploit. Jada's public relations firm was worth millions. If he could trick her into signing a corporate guarantee, he could take out a massive commercial loan against her business to pay off Vanguard Horizon. 10 minutes later, Trent emerged from the kitchen looking frantic, but trying desperately to maintain his billionaire smile. He found Jada talking to a group of local politicians. He wrapped his arm around her waist, a gesture of affection that made my skin crawl, just watching it from a distance. "Baby, I need you for a quick second," Trent said, guiding her away from the crowd and into a quiet hallway near the study. Jada kept her phone recording. "What is wrong, honey? You look pale. Are you feeling okay?" Trent pulled a folded document from his inside pocket. He tried to play it off as a casual, routine piece of paperwork. The closing agents for the house just sent over a final tax compliance form. "It is just standard procedure for the new mansion, since I put it under your holding company. I just need you to sign right here so they can finalize the municipal tax rate." Jada took the paper. As a CEO who reads multi-million-dollar contracts every single day, she spotted the trap instantly. It was not a tax compliance form. It was a corporate collateral agreement. The document pledged Horizon Public Relations' entire operating budget and client retainer accounts as collateral to cover an $8 million liability. Trent was trying to legally steal her company right in the middle of a cocktail party. Jada took the gold-plated pen he offered her. She looked at the document, pretended to squint at the fine print, and then handed the pen back with an apologetic smile. "I should probably have my legal team review this on Monday, honey," Jada said sweetly. "You know how strict my corporate board is about signing liability waivers. They get so anxious about compliance." Trent's panic spiked immediately. His voice rose, the mask of the calm, collected tech genius slipping away. "No, Jada. I need it signed tonight. The closing agents require it before midnight to lock in the interest rate. Please just trust me. It is just a formality. Just sign the paper, Jada." My father Richard stepped into the hallway trying to back up his son. "Jada, Trent knows what he is doing. In the business world, you have to move fast. Do not let your corporate lawyers slow down his vision. Be a supportive wife and sign the document." Jada looked at my father, then back at her husband. She maintained her boundaries with terrifying grace. "I trust you completely, Trent. But I left my reading glasses at the office, and I have a strict policy against signing unreviewed corporate pledges after I have had a glass of champagne. I will sign it first thing Monday morning. Go enjoy your party. You earned it." She patted Trent's cheek and walked gracefully back into the ballroom, leaving the two men standing in the hallway suffocating in their own impending doom. My phone buzzed one last time. Jada sent a single text message. "The bait is set. They are completely out of options. They are planning to flee." I closed my laptop and started the engine of my car. Vanguard Horizon had given them until Monday. But Jada and I had absolutely no intention of letting them enjoy their Sunday. It was time to finish this. I arrived at my office on Monday morning at exactly 7:30. The firm I work for occupies the entire 12th floor of a prominent downtown high-rise. It is a space designed for serious financial investigations, featuring glass-walled conference rooms and strict security protocols. I had barely finished my first cup of black coffee when absolute chaos erupted at the front reception desk. I heard my mother before I saw her. Diane possessed a specific piercing wail that she reserved exclusively for moments when she needed to weaponize public sympathy. I stepped out of my office and looked down the long corridor. My parents had somehow bypassed building security by tailgating a delivery courier. Now they were staging a full theatrical production right in the middle of our corporate lobby. My colleagues, seasoned financial investigators who usually dealt with cold, hard numbers, stood frozen at their desks, staring in sheer disbelief. My mother was dramatically leaning against the polished mahogany reception desk, clutching a designer handkerchief to her face. Her makeup was meticulously smudged to give the illusion of sleepless distress. My father, Richard, stood beside her with his shoulders slumped, playing the role of the exhausted, broken patriarch perfectly. When Diane spotted me standing at the end of the hallway, she let out a theatrical gasp and practically threw herself forward. "Naomi? Oh, my sweet girl." Diane cried out, her voice echoing off the glass walls. She rushed toward me, trying to grab my hands, but I took a sharp step back, crossing my arms over my chest. "Please, Naomi, you have to help us. We made a mistake, but we are your parents. You cannot let our family be destroyed." I looked at the dozens of forensic accountants watching the spectacle. "Step into my office," I ordered, my voice dangerously calm. "Now." As soon as the heavy glass door clicked shut, sealing us inside my soundproof office, the dynamic instantly shifted. But Diane was not ready to drop the act. She collapsed into one of my leather guest chairs and buried her face in her hands. "It is Jada," Diane sobbed, peeking through her fingers to gauge my reaction. "I am so sorry, Naomi, but Jada tricked Trent into signing all those papers. That girl is greedy. We warned Trent about marrying a woman like that. She set up that entire fake LLC just to steal the real estate money and frame your brother. She is trying to take the Belmead mansion for herself. Save your brother, Naomi. You know how to track these financial things. You have to prove Jada stole the $8 million. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. The sheer, unadulterated audacity required to walk into my workplace and attempt to gaslight me into destroying an innocent black woman was staggering. They honestly believed they could manipulate my forensic expertise to frame my sister-in-law for their own federal crimes. They were trying to flip the narrative, painting the highly successful public relations executive as a gold-digging mastermind and portraying my gambling-addicted brother as her innocent victim. So I said, leaning against the edge of my glass desk, "You are claiming Jada orchestrated the entire Vanguard Horizon real estate fraud?" "Yes," my father interjected eagerly, stepping closer. "Trent is too trusting. He just signs whatever legal documents his wife puts in front of him. Jada orchestrated the whole thing because she wanted the cash. You have to use your firm's resources to run an audit on her agency, prove she took the money." I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and opened the voice recording application. I pressed the red circular button and placed the phone face up in the dead center of my desk. The timer started ticking upward. "This is a formal forensic intake," I stated clinically, looking my father dead in the eye. "If you want me to build a fraud case against Jada, I need to establish the exact timeline of the initial real estate transaction. Every single detail must be documented. Are we clear?" Richard and Diane exchanged a quick, desperate glance. They thought they had won. They thought my cold demeanor was just my usual professional attitude kicking in. They had no idea they were voluntarily stepping right into a federal trap. "We will tell you everything you need to know," Richard said, nodding vigorously. "Let us start with the preliminary land survey," I said, picking up a pen and twirling it between my fingers. Vanguard Horizon purchased the coastal property in Maine last week, but the deed Vanguard holds required the original signature of the property owner. My grandfather passed away 14 years ago. So how did Vanguard Horizon get my grandfather's wet ink signature on the transfer authorization? Diane shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Well, Trent handled the broker communications. Jada must have told him how to submit the paperwork. That does not answer my question, Mom. I pushed back, my voice hardening. Jada was not in the picture 14 years ago. The deed transferred to Vanguard Horizon requires a signature matching the original county records. Who physically signed my grandfather's name on the deed that was submitted to the closing attorney last Tuesday? Richard wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. Naomi, these are technicalities. The point is that Jada ended up with the funds in her LLC. It is not a technicality, Dad, I snapped, leaning forward. It is Title 18, United States Code Section 471. It is a federal felony. If I am going to point the FBI toward Jada, I need to know exactly how the initial forgery was executed. The FBI handwriting analysts will pull the original documents. If Jada did not sign my grandfather's name, then who did? Because right now, the only people who had access to my grandfather's old safe, where the preliminary surveys were kept, are the two of you. Diane's fake tears instantly dried up. Her face morphed from pitiful sorrow into cornered panic. You are interrogating us. We came here for your help. I am establishing the chain of custody, I countered ruthlessly. I cannot accuse a prominent corporate executive of wire fraud if the foundational document was forged by her husband's parents. So I will ask you one last time, who forged the signature on the deed? The silence in my office was deafening. Outside the glass walls, my colleagues were still casting curious glances our way, but inside the air was suffocatingly thick. Richard looked at the recording phone on the desk, then looked at me, his eyes wide with a sudden, horrifying realization. He finally understood what I was doing, but Diane, blinded by her own desperate narcissism and absolute refusal to accept accountability, snapped. Fine. We signed it, Diane screamed, slamming her hands down on the armrests of the guest chair. Your father signed your grandfather's name on the transfer deed. We had to do it. The land was just sitting there gathering dust, and Trent was drowning. He needed the capital for his tech company. It was a victimless crime until that greedy wife of his decided to route the money into her own holding company and steal it from him. I did not blink. I did not move. I just let the timer on my phone tick up another 3 seconds to ensure the audio captured the echo of her confession perfectly. Let me get this completely straight, I said, my voice echoing with lethal precision. You are admitting on the record that you and Richard knowingly and willfully committed felony forgery by signing a deceased man's name on a real estate transfer deed with the explicit intent to defraud Vanguard Horizon out of $8 million, all to fund Trent's gambling addiction. It was not for gambling, Richard yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. It was for his business. And you are our daughter. You cannot use this against us. We are flesh and blood. You are common criminals, I corrected him, reaching forward and tapping the red button on my phone to stop the recording. I saved the audio file and instantly uploaded a copy to my secure encrypted cloud server, and you are phenomenally stupid criminals at that. The illusion of the pitiful, loving parents completely evaporated. Diane jumped up from her chair, her face contorted with pure, unadulterated hatred. She lunged toward my desk, reaching for my phone. I simply slid the device into my blazer pocket and stepped back. Give me that phone! Naomi, Diane shrieked, her hands curling into claws. You delete that right now, you ungrateful, malicious little rat. After everything we sacrificed to raise you, you are trying to send us to prison just because you are jealous of your brother. I am not jealous of a man who is about to be indicted by the Department of Justice, I replied calmly. And for the record, Jada did not steal a single cent from Trent. Trent used Jada's identity to launder the stolen Vanguard funds because his own credit is destroyed. He bought that mansion under her name to frame her. I know this because I pulled the digital footprints myself. Jada is completely innocent, and she is currently working with her own high-powered legal team to legally obliterate your precious son. Richard stumbled backward, bumping into the glass wall of my office. He looked like he was going to be physically sick. You gave the evidence to Jada. He gasped, his voice barely a whisper. You betrayed your own family for a stranger. Jada is not a stranger, I said, walking around my desk to stand mere inches from my father. She is a brilliant woman who made the unfortunate mistake of marrying into a family of narcissistic parasites. I simply gave her the financial data she needed to protect herself from your son's predatory behavior. And now I have your recorded confession to the original forgery. I walked past them and opened my office door, letting the ambient noise of the accounting firm flood back into the room. Several of my colleagues immediately looked our way. You have exactly 30 seconds to leave my firm before I call building security and have you escorted out in front of my entire professional network, I announced loudly, ensuring the entire floor could hear me. If you ever show your faces at my workplace again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Diane stood frozen in the center of my office, shaking with rage. You will burn in hell for this, Naomi. You are destroying your own family. We will lose everything. You lost everything the day you decided to steal my college fund to buy a sports car, I reminded her, keeping my voice loud and perfectly clear. Now get out. Vanguard Horizon gave you until the end of the business day to return the $8 million. I suggest you spend your remaining hours finding a very good criminal defense attorney. You are going to need one. My father grabbed my mother's arm, pulling her toward the door. They practically scrambled out of my office, keeping their heads down as they rushed past the rows of staring forensic accountants. They looked exactly like what they were. Guilty, desperate fraudsters fleeing the scene of their own destruction. I watched them disappear into the elevator lobby, feeling an immense, profound sense of closure. The gaslighting was over. The manipulation had failed entirely. They had walked into my domain, thinking they could twist reality to fit their delusional narrative, and they had walked out, leaving behind a perfectly recorded federal confession. I went back into my office, closed the glass door, and pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened my messages and sent a quick text to Jada. I have the audio confession for the initial forgery. They admitted to everything on tape. Vanguard's deadline is in 6 hours. How are things on your end? I sat down in my chair, ready for the final act of this incredible, self-inflicted family tragedy. My phone chimed on the glass desk with a secure message. It was Jada. I secured the perimeter, she wrote. He is completely locked out of every financial institution connected to my name, but he has no idea I filed the divorce papers an hour ago. I am currently playing the terrified, devoted wife on my secondary phone. What is the status of Vanguard Horizon? I typed back quickly, my eyes darting to my third monitor where I had set up a live refresh of the federal court dockets. Vanguard Horizon is running out of patience. Their legal team sent a final demand letter to Richard and Diane 10 minutes ago. If the $8 million is not wired back by exactly 5 o'clock this evening, they are filing a civil suit for grand larceny and making a direct criminal referral to the FBI. Jada replied instantly. Keep watching the cloud drive, Trent is melting down. I navigated back to the synced family text messages, watching my brother's sheer panic unfold in real time. Trent was trapped in a financial nightmare entirely of his own making. He had tried to log into the fake LLC bank account to wire the stolen money back to Vanguard Horizon, desperately hoping to reverse the transaction and avoid prison. But because Jada had placed a hard fraud alert on her social security number, the bank had frozen the account entirely. Trent sent a frantic message to my parents. Dad, the bank froze the transfer. They locked the account. I called customer service, and they said there is a high-level security hold because of the massive transfer volume. I cannot move the money. I cannot give Vanguard their $8 million back. We are trapped. My father replied a minute later, his text riddled with typos that betrayed his trembling hands. What do you mean you are trapped? Call Jada. Have her authorize the release. Tell her it is a corporate emergency. Vanguard is going to call the federal authorities at 5. We have less than 3 hours. I watched the digital cursor blink as Trent typed his response. I cannot tell Jada the truth. If she finds out I forged her signature to buy a mansion with stolen funds, she will divorce me. I told her the bank froze the account because my new tech investors triggered a regulatory review. She bought it. But we cannot wait for the bank to lift the hold. If Vanguard calls the FBI at 5, we are all going to be arrested by dinner time. My mother Diane chimed into the group chat, her absolute lack of morality shining through the text. We have to leave. We have to leave the country right now. Trent, you have offshore contacts from your betting days, right? You told me you knew people in the Cayman Islands who hide assets for wealthy clients. We need to go there. It was almost poetic. My mother, the woman who had spent her entire life attending country club luncheons and judging people for wearing last season's designer shoes, was now actively plotting to become an international fugitive. She was perfectly willing to abandon her entire life in Nashville to avoid wearing a federal prison uniform. Trent went quiet in the group chat for 5 minutes. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was calling Jada, preparing to manipulate the woman he thought was his gullible, wealthy shield. My phone buzzed again, with a text from Jada giving me the live play-by-play of his pathetic phone call. He is hyperventilating, Jada wrote. He just told me that his new tech investors are actually involved in a massive corporate espionage scandal. He is claiming that federal agents might raid our house by mistake because his name is on the investment paperwork. He is begging me to help him flee the country before the authorities confiscate his non-existent app source code. I laughed out loud in the quiet of my office. He is trying to frame his federal real estate fraud as a victimless corporate misunderstanding. What did you tell him? I told him I believe him completely, Jada replied. I am playing the hysterical, loyal wife. I told him I am terrified of the government seizing my public relations agency by association. I suggested we need to leave the United States immediately until his high-powered lawyers can clear his name. The brilliance of Jada's strategy was breathtaking. She was not just refusing to be his victim, she was actively constructing the gallows and handing him the rope. I just booked a private jet through my agency's corporate travel account. Jada texted me a few minutes later, attaching a screenshot of the flight charter confirmation. I told Trent I used my company credentials, so the flight manifest would not flag his name in the commercial airline database. We are scheduled to depart from the private aviation terminal at the international airport at 6 o'clock this evening. I stared at the flight confirmation. Jada had chartered a mid-size Gulfstream jet fully paid for with a flight plan filed for a direct route to the Cayman Islands. To Trent, it looked like his wealthy black wife was sacrificing her corporate resources to save him from a misunderstanding. He thought he had successfully manipulated her into funding his grand escape. In reality, Jada had just handed the Federal Bureau of Investigation the exact time, location, and tail number of a primary flight risk attempting to flee federal jurisdiction. I switched my attention back to the family group chat. Trent had just updated Richard and Diane with the miraculous news. Pack your bags right now, Trent ordered his parents. Jada is saving us. She believes my story about the tech investors. She chartered a private jet through her public relations firm. It flies direct to the Caymans at 6. Leave everything else behind. Take whatever cash and jewelry you can fit into a carry-on bag. Meet me at the private aviation terminal by 5:30. We are getting out of here, my mother replied instantly. Thank God I knew she was good for something. We are packing now. I sat back in my chair and watched the clock on my monitor. It was 4 in the afternoon. Vanguard Horizon's deadline was exactly 1 hour away. My parents and my golden child brother were currently throwing designer clothes into suitcases, utterly convinced they had outsmarted a multi-billion-dollar real estate conglomerate and the federal government. They thought they were flying off to a tropical tax haven to sip cocktails and wait for the dust to settle. My desk phone rang. It was a direct line from Jada's lead corporate attorney, a sharp, highly respected litigator who specialized in high-asset fraud cases. Naomi, the attorney, said smoothly. Jada requested I give you a status update. I have just concluded a meeting with the United States Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Tennessee. I grabbed a legal pad and a pen. Tell me you gave them the binder. I gave them the entire forensic dossier you prepared, he confirmed. I handed over the forged LLC incorporation papers, the wire transfer receipts, the deed to the Belmead mansion with Jada's forged signature, and the complete audit of Trent's offshore gambling debts. I also provided them with the audio recording you secured this morning, featuring Richard and Diane explicitly confessing to forging the original property deed. How did the federal prosecutor react to the recording? I asked, tapping my pen against the desk. He was practically salivating. The attorney replied with a dry chuckle. Your forensic accounting work handed them an airtight, trial-ready case on a silver platter. White-collar fraud investigations usually take months to untangle. You mapped the entire conspiracy in 24 hours. Because the stolen funds cross state lines and utilize electronic banking systems, they are pursuing immediate indictments for wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. I checked the time. It was 4:30. What about the flight risk? I asked. Trent and my parents are currently packing their bags. They plan to board a chartered Gulfstream to the Cayman Islands at 6. The attorney's voice dropped to a serious professional pitch. Because the suspects are actively attempting to flee international borders with stolen assets, the federal judge bypassed the standard grand jury preliminary hearing. The judge signed emergency no-knock arrest warrants 15 minutes ago. The FBI White-Collar Crime Division is coordinating with airport police. They are setting a perimeter around the private aviation terminal as we speak. Excellent, I said, a deep sense of satisfaction settling in my chest. Thank you for the update. I hung up the phone and turned my eyes back to the dual monitors. The countdown was in its final stages. It was 4:45. I imagined the frantic scene at my parents' house. I pictured Richard frantically trying to remember the combination to his wall safe to grab his emergency cash. I pictured Diane agonizing over which diamond necklaces to stuff into her designer handbag, prioritizing her vanity over her impending doom. I pictured Trent pacing around his newly purchased, fraudulently obtained mansion, sweating through his shirt, checking his luxury watch every 10 seconds, completely unaware that his wife had already signed his death warrant. At exactly 4:59, the federal court docket on my third monitor automatically refreshed. The screen blinked and a new filing populated at the very top of the list: Vanguard Horizon Real Estate Group versus Richard, Diane, and Trent. The charges listed were staggering: grand larceny, felony forgery, wire fraud, civil conspiracy. The massive real estate conglomerate had officially pulled the trigger. They filed the civil suit publicly, which meant the corresponding criminal referral to the FBI was now fully activated in the federal system. The ticking time bomb had reached zero. The explosion was entirely silent, existing only in lines of digital code court filings and federal arrest warrants, but the destruction it was about to cause was absolute. I stood up from my desk, smoothed down my tailored blazer, and gathered my things. My colleagues in the accounting firm were starting to pack up for the day, chatting about their weekend plans and dinner reservations. They had no idea that I had just spent the afternoon orchestrating the complete legal and financial annihilation of my own family. I walked out of my office, rode the elevator down to the parking garage, and got into my car. I did not turn the key in the ignition right away. I sat in the quiet, dim light of the concrete structure, breathing in the cool air conditioning. For 32 years, I had been the family disappointment. I was the boring, quiet girl who played with calculators while Trent received standing ovations for simply existing. I was the daughter whose college fund was stolen without a second thought, whose hard work was constantly belittled, whose very presence was treated as a dull inconvenience. They had pushed me aside, underestimated me, and finally they tried to frame an innocent woman and flee the country with my inheritance. They thought they were the smartest people in every room they entered. They thought their privilege and their arrogance made them untouchable. My phone lit up in the cup holder, illuminating the dark interior of my car. It was a text message from Jada. I picked up the phone and read the single line of text shining brightly on the screen. The words were simple, clinical, and absolutely devastating. The prey is in the cage. Get ready to pull the net. I started the engine, shifted the car into drive, and headed toward the international airport. I was not going there to stop them. I was going there to watch them fall. I pulled into the private aviation terminal of Nashville International Airport just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in bruised shades of purple and orange, a fitting backdrop for the absolute destruction about to unfold. I parked my sedan a safe distance away from the main entrance, taking note of the 3 unmarked black SUVs idling discreetly near the chain-link security fence. Federal agents have a very specific way of blending in while simultaneously looking entirely out of place. I grabbed my briefcase, locked my car, and walked toward the glass-fronted VIP lounge. Jada was waiting for me inside the terminal lobby. She looked magnificent. She wore a tailored crimson pantsuit that screamed executive power, her posture perfectly straight, her expression carved from solid ice. There was not a single trace of the devoted, terrified wife she had been playing over the phone for the past 4 hours. She was a CEO executing a hostile takeover of her own life. We did not exchange a hug or a handshake. We simply locked eyes, two women bound by a shared mission to eradicate a mutual parasite. "The flight crew is playing along perfectly," Jada said, her voice low and steady. "I spoke to the lead FBI agent 10 minutes ago. They have the terminal locked down. The tarmac access doors are electronically sealed. The second Trent and your parents step past the security desk, they are stepping into a federal holding pen." I nodded, adjusting the strap of my briefcase. "Vanguard Horizon's deadline passed 20 minutes ago. The civil suit is officially live on the federal docket. The criminal referral is fully active. They have absolutely zero legal cover." Before we could say anything else, a black luxury SUV pulled up to the circular drop-off zone outside the glass doors. Jada and I immediately stepped back into the shadows of a private alcove near the concierge desk, completely out of their direct line of sight. My brother Trent stepped out of the vehicle first. He was sweating profusely, his face flushed, looking frantically over his shoulder, as if he expected a SWAT team to drop from the sky. He popped the trunk and began hauling out massive, overstuffed designer suitcases. My parents emerged next. Diane was clutching a large leather tote bag to her chest, undoubtedly packed with every piece of diamond jewelry she could snatch from her vanity. Richard looked pale, scanning the quiet terminal with nervous, darting eyes. They hauled their heavy luggage through the sliding glass doors, their expensive wheels clacking loudly against the polished marble floor. The sheer arrogance rolling off them was palpable. Even in the middle of fleeing the country to avoid federal prosecution, my mother adjusted her silk scarf and lifted her chin, trying to project an air of aristocratic superiority to the empty lobby. "Hurry up," Trent hissed at my parents, dragging two massive suitcases toward the check-in desk. "The pilot said we have clearance for immediate takeoff. Once we are in the air, American jurisdiction ends. I have a contact in the Caymans who can liquidate the rest of the funds by tomorrow morning." "Thank God you married that woman," Diane whispered loudly, checking her reflection in the glass partition. "She finally proved herself useful. Let her deal with the corporate lawyers. We will send for our things once you set up the new accounts." Richard let out a shaky breath of relief. "You played her perfectly, Trent. I was worried she might ask too many questions about the tech investors, but you handled it. We just need to get on that plane." Listening to them congratulate each other on exploiting an innocent black woman was the final nail in the coffin of my familial empathy. They were truly irredeemable. Trent slammed his passport onto the concierge desk. "Trenton Holdings," he barked at the attendant. "We have a chartered Gulfstream waiting on the tarmac. We need immediate boarding access." The attendant, who had clearly been briefed by federal authorities, offered a tight, polite smile. "Right this way, sir. Please proceed through the double doors to the tarmac holding area." Trent grabbed his bags, motioning for Richard and Diane to follow. They practically sprinted toward the frosted glass double doors leading to the runway. Trent pushed the door open completely, expecting to feel the warm jet wash of a waiting Gulfstream. Instead, he stepped directly into a wall of dark windbreakers. "Trenton," a deep, authoritative voice boomed. Trent froze. He dropped his suitcases. The heavy bags hit the marble floor with a deafening thud. Stepping out from the tarmac access corridor were 6 federal agents wearing tactical vests, with FBI emblazoned across the chest in bright yellow lettering. Behind them stood the local county sheriff and 4 armed airport police officers. They formed an impenetrable, solid wall of law enforcement. My mother let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp and stumbled backward, colliding heavily with my father. Richard raised his hands instinctively, his face draining of all color. Trenton, Richard, and Diane, the lead FBI agent, announced, stepping forward with a stack of warrants in his hand. "Do not move. Keep your hands visible. Wait." "No." Trent screamed, his voice cracking in sheer panic. "There is a misunderstanding. I have a private jet waiting. My wife chartered it for a corporate retreat. This is a corporate flight." "Your wife did charter a flight," a sharp, commanding voice echoed through the lobby. Jada stepped out from the shadows of the alcove, her emerald green heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. I walked perfectly in step beside her, holding my briefcase. Trent spun around, His eyes widened in absolute shock when he saw Jada walking toward him. Then his gaze shifted to me, and his jaw practically unhinged. The confusion, terror, and sudden realization hitting him all at once was a masterpiece of human destruction. Jada Trent gasped, taking a hesitant step toward her, before an FBI agent barked at him to stay put. "Jada, what are you doing here? You are supposed to be at the house dealing with the tech investors. And why is Naomi here? Tell them you booked this flight for my company." Jada stopped 5 feet away from him. She looked him up and down with an expression of such profound, icy disgust that Trent visibly flinched. "You lying, manipulative traitor!" Trent suddenly screamed, his fear mutating into explosive, desperate anger. He pointed a shaking finger at Jada. "You set me up! You brought the feds here, you backstabbing traitor!" Jada did not flinch. She reached into her tailored crimson blazer and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy metal clip. Without breaking eye contact, she threw the entire stack directly at his chest. The heavy papers hit him hard and scattered across the polished floor at his feet. "I filed for a high-asset contested divorce exactly 4 hours ago," Jada stated, her voice ringing with absolute lethal authority. "And attached to that petition is a federal emergency injunction. I froze every single bank account, credit line, and digital wallet bearing your name. I locked the equity line you fraudulently opened against my house. You do not have a single penny to your name." Trent stared at the divorce papers scattered on the floor, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. "This plane was never going to the Cayman Islands." "Trent?" Jada continued, leaning in slightly, her voice dropping to a razor-sharp whisper. "I chartered this flight just so you would pack your bags, leave your house, and walk yourself directly into a federal trap. You honestly thought you could use my pristine corporate identity to launder $3 million of stolen real estate funds and leave me to take the fall. You thought I was your clueless shield." Jada laughed, a harsh, unforgiving sound. "I am a crisis management executive. I destroy people for a living. You picked the wrong woman to exploit. She is lying," Diane shrieked from behind. Trent pointing a trembling, manicured finger at Jada. "Officer, arrest her. She orchestrated the whole thing. She opened the fake company. She stole the Vanguard money." I stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Jada. I looked directly at my mother, who was currently clutching her jewelry-stuffed tote bag like a life preserver. "Actually, Mom," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the terminal, "the FBI already knows exactly who opened the fake LLC. Because I gave them the geolocation tags proving Trent forged Jada's digital signature from your living room router. I also gave them the complete paper trail showing Trent moving the stolen funds to an offshore gambling syndicate." My father Richard looked at me, his eyes wide with sheer terror. "Naomi, please, you cannot do this. We are your blood. You lost the right to use that word when you forged my grandfather's name on a federal real estate document," I replied coldly. I patted my briefcase. "I handed the United States Attorney a complete forensic audit of your entire conspiracy. I gave them the wire transfer receipts, the fake deed to the Belmead mansion, and the audio recording of you, Diane, screaming about how you forged the transfer deed to fund Trent's gambling addiction." Trent's knees buckled. He physically swayed, catching himself on the edge of the concierge desk. "You recorded us," he choked out, looking at his mother. "Mom, you admitted it on tape." Diane put her hands over her mouth, letting out a horrific, muffled wail. The realization that her own arrogance had just handed the federal government the murder weapon finally broke her. "You are entirely out of moves, Trent," I said, watching my brother completely unravel. "Vanguard Horizon filed their civil suit an hour ago. The $8 million was not returned. The federal deadline passed. The game is over. I am your brother." Trent screamed at me, tears of pure panic streaming down his face. "You cannot send me to federal prison. I will not survive there, Jada, please. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will pay it back. I will sign whatever you want." Jada looked at the man she had loved, the man who had secretly drained her retirement accounts and tried to frame her for a felony. There was absolutely zero mercy in her eyes. "You can sign your confession," Jada said ruthlessly. The lead FBI agent stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. Trenton, Richard, and Diane, the agent said, his voice echoing loudly in the silent terminal. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering. Turn around and place your hands behind your backs. The lobby of the private aviation terminal dissolved into pure, unadulterated chaos. My mother, Diane, began screaming at the top of her lungs, a shrill, piercing noise that echoed off the high ceilings. She thrashed against the firm grip of the federal agent, attempting to secure her wrists, her designer tote bag spilling its contents across the floor. Diamond tennis bracelets, heavy gold watches, and thick stacks of banded $100 bills scattered across the marble, glittering under the fluorescent lights, like a pathetic display of their profound greed. I am not a criminal, Diane shrieked, her face contorted into a mask of absolute terror. I am a respectable woman. You cannot treat me like this. Richard, do something. Call our lawyers. This is a mistake. My father, Richard, was incapable of doing anything. He stood completely frozen, his eyes wide and vacant as an FBI agent swiftly clamped the steel cuffs around his wrists. The reality of his situation had finally penetrated his thick skull. He was not a sophisticated titan of industry orchestrating a brilliant international escape. He was just an old man who had forged a signature stolen money and gotten caught by his own daughter. He looked incredibly small, fragile, and utterly defeated. Trent, however, was fighting back with every ounce of his pathetic existence. He threw himself against the glass partition, trying to wriggle out of the grip of two massive airport police officers. Get off me! Trent roared, his face turning an ugly, mottled red. You do not understand. I am a tech founder. I have venture capital backing. My wife is a CEO. Jada, tell them you authorized the transfer. Tell them this is a corporate misunderstanding. Jada did not move. She stood beside me, her posture immaculate, watching her soon-to-be ex-husband unravel with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an insect under a microscope. Agent Reynolds, I said, stepping forward with my briefcase. I am the forensic accountant who compiled the evidence regarding the Vanguard Horizon real estate fraud and the subsequent money laundering operation. The lead FBI agent, a tall, imposing man with graying temples, turned his attention to me. He nodded curtly, his expression professional and intensely focused. Your attorney sent over the digital files, Ms. Hayes. The preliminary analysis provided enough probable cause for the emergency warrants, but we are going to need the hard copies for the chain of custody. I unclasped my briefcase and pulled out the thick black leather binder. It felt heavy in my hands, a physical manifestation of 32 years of resentment, betrayal, and meticulous, undeniable proof. This is the complete forensic report, I stated, handing the binder directly to Agent Reynolds. It contains the original forged transfer deed submitted to Vanguard Horizon, the bank routing numbers tracing the stolen $8 million, and the specific IP addresses proving the digital forgery of Jada's LLC incorporation documents originated from my parents' residential router. Agent Reynolds took the binder, flipping it open to the first tab. He scanned the top page, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the sheer, blatant criminality outlined in the documents. I also included a comprehensive audit of Trent's offshore gambling syndicates. I continued, ensuring my voice carried clearly across the terminal lobby so my family could hear every single word. The report details exactly how Trent liquidated Jada's 401k retirement accounts by forging her signature on a spousal consent waiver, and how he used those funds to pay illegal bookmakers in the Cayman Islands. Trent stopped fighting the officers. He went completely limp, sagging against the glass partition. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He looked at Jada, his eyes begging for mercy that he absolutely did not deserve. Jada, please, Trent whispered, his voice cracking. I can fix this. I can pay you back. I love you. Jada let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound devoid of any warmth or affection. You do not love me, Trent. You love my credit score. You love my earning potential. You love that I provided a beautiful, wealthy shield for your pathetic, gambling-addicted reality. She took a step closer to him, her emerald green heels clicking sharply against the floor. I built my empire from nothing. Jada said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register. You thought because I trusted you, you could use my name to launder stolen money and frame me for federal wire fraud. You thought I would take the fall so you could fly off to a tropical island. You are not a tech founder, you are a parasite, and I am going to enjoy watching the federal government dissect you. Diane, who had been struggling against her handcuffs, suddenly wrenched her head toward me. Her eyes were wild, filled with a toxic mixture of panic, hatred, and a desperate, manipulative need to regain control. Naomi Diane screamed, her voice tearing through the terminal. How can you do this to us? We are your family. I am the mother who gave birth to you. I raised you. I put a roof over your head. You are sending your own flesh and blood to federal prison. You are destroying this family. I turned slowly to face her. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel invisible. I looked at the woman who had criticized my appearance, mocked my career choices, and constantly compared me to her golden, worthless son. I looked at the woman who had gleefully plotted to let an innocent black woman take the fall for a federal felony just to protect her precious boy. You destroyed this family a long time ago, Mom, I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotion. You destroyed it on my 18th birthday, when you and Dad drained my college fund, a fund my grandfather set up specifically for my education to buy Trent a Porsche. You watched me work triple shifts at a greasy diner just to afford community college, and you never offered me a single cent or a word of encouragement. I took a step closer, ensuring she heard every syllable. You destroyed this family when you constantly told your friends I was just a boring, quiet accountant while you bragged about Trent's non-existent success. You destroyed it when you tried to steal my grandfather's coastal property, the only thing he left me to ensure my future, because you needed to bail out your gambling-addicted son. Diane sobbed a loud, ugly sound, trying to pull her hands free from the cuffs to wipe her face. We made mistakes. We are not perfect, but we do not deserve this. We do not deserve to lose everything. You are not losing everything because of me, I corrected her sharply. You are losing everything because you committed multiple federal felonies. You forged a signature on a real estate deed. You engaged in a conspiracy to commit wire fraud. You actively plotted to launder stolen funds. I did not force you to break the law. I simply collected the receipts. I am a forensic accountant. I track numbers, and numbers do not lie. I looked at my father, who was staring at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. I looked at Trent, who was quietly weeping against the glass partition. And finally, I looked back at my mother. You called me a cold-blooded monster, I said, remembering her frantic phone call from yesterday morning. You told me I was ruining the family. But the truth is, this family died 14 years ago. I am not destroying anything. I am just taking out the trash. Agent Reynolds closed the black binder and handed it to a junior agent standing nearby. Secure this in the evidence lockbox, he ordered. He turned back to my family, his expression hardening into pure, unyielding authority. Richard, Diane, and Trent and Agent Reynolds announced loudly, ensuring the arresting officers had a clear mandate. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you? My parents and my brother did not answer. They were completely paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming reality of their situation. The arrogance that had fueled their entire lives had been completely shattered, replaced by the terrifying certainty of impending federal prosecution. Take them away, Agent Reynolds instructed the officers. The airport police and the federal agents began moving my family toward the exit doors. They shuffled forward, their heads bowed, the heavy steel handcuffs clinking against each other. They looked broken, defeated, and entirely pathetic. They had walked into the terminal expecting to board a private jet to a tropical paradise funded by stolen millions and built on the ruined reputation of an innocent woman. Instead, they were walking out to a fleet of federal transport vehicles headed straight for a holding cell at the United States District Court. I watched them go, feeling a profound, undeniable sense of justice. There were no tears. There was no regret. There was only the cold, hard satisfaction of seeing the truth finally undeniably exposed. As the glass doors slid shut behind them, sealing their fate, Jada turned to me. She let out a long, slow breath, her shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade. She looked at the scattered designer luggage, the spilled diamonds, and the stacks of $100 bills still lying on the marble floor. "Well," Jada said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through her icy facade. "That was certainly the most productive Saturday evening I have had in years." I smiled back at her, feeling a deep, unexpected kinship with the woman who had just helped me dismantle my toxic family. "I have to agree," I replied, adjusting the collar of my blazer. "I think we make a pretty incredible team." Jada nodded, her eyes flashing with intelligence and mutual respect. "I think we do. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to call my divorce attorney and make sure he files an emergency motion to seize that Belle Meade mansion. I am not letting the federal government take a house that was bought with my stolen retirement funds. I am going to sell that monstrosity and buy myself a very nice vacation home in the south of France." I laughed, a genuine joyful sound that echoed through the quiet terminal. "I think you absolutely deserve it." Jada turned and walked toward the exit, her emerald green heels clicking sharply against the floor. I stood alone in the terminal for a moment, watching the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers reflecting off the glass windows. The storm had finally passed, and the wreckage of my family's lies lay scattered around me. But for the first time in 32 years, I did not feel the weight of their expectations or the sting of their constant criticism. I felt light. I felt powerful. And most importantly, I felt completely unequivocally free. I walked out of the private aviation lounge and followed the procession at a safe distance. I wanted to witness every single second of their departure. The federal agents did not afford them the luxury of a discreet exit through a back private door. Because of the security perimeter setup and the sheer amount of designer luggage that had to be impounded as evidence, the agents marched Richard, Diane, and Trent directly through the main commercial terminal to reach the federal transport vans. This was a bustling Saturday evening at Nashville International Airport. The main concourse was packed with travelers, families, and business professionals. As the heavy glass doors of the VIP section slid open, the reality of their public downfall hit my parents like a freight train. Diane tried to hide her face behind her shoulder, but her hands were securely cuffed behind her back. The heavy diamond tennis bracelets she had frantically shoved into her pockets had been confiscated as evidence of money laundering, leaving her wrists bare and chafed by the cold steel. For a woman who had spent 32 years meticulously curating an image of flawless upper-crust superiority, being paraded through a public airport in handcuffs was a fate worse than death. I watched as people pulled out their smartphones. The flash of cameras illuminated her tear-streaked, ruined makeup. She was no longer a wealthy socialite looking down on the working class. She was just another white-collar criminal going to jail, becoming a spectacle for strangers to record and post online. My father, Richard, kept his eyes glued to the polished tile floor. The man who had always demanded total submission, who had proudly stolen his own daughter's college fund to maintain a facade of wealth, now walked with a heavy, shuffling gait. He had completely lost the arrogant, commanding posture that defined his entire existence. The illusion of his power was gone, stripped away by the severe, unyielding reality of federal law enforcement. But Trent was the most pathetic sight of all. The golden child, the supposed tech genius, was openly sobbing. He dragged his feet, practically having to be carried by the two federal agents flanking him. He kept looking back, scanning the crowd with red, swollen eyes, perhaps hoping Jada would miraculously change her mind and throw her millions of dollars at the authorities to save him. But Jada was already gone. She was moving swiftly with her corporate attorneys to protect her empire from his toxic fallout. Trent was finally completely alone, and he lacked the fundamental spine to face his own consequences. For 35 years, my parents had shielded him from every failure, bought his way out of every mistake, and blamed everyone else for his shortcomings. Now, facing the United States Department of Justice, there was no checkbook large enough to bail him out. I stood near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the main terminal, watching as the federal agents loaded them into the back of 3 separate black transport SUVs. The heavy doors slammed shut with a definitive echoing thud that resonated in my chest. The red and blue emergency lights flashed violently against the airport tarmac as the convoy pulled away, merging onto the highway and disappearing into the dark Nashville night. I took a deep, cleansing breath. The toxic weight that had pressed down on my shoulders for my entire life was entirely gone. I turned around and walked back to the parking garage, my footsteps steady, rhythmic, and purposeful. I unlocked my car door, slid into the driver's seat, and placed my briefcase carefully on the passenger side. I pressed the ignition button, and my car engine purred to life. The dashboard screen lit up, illuminating the dark interior of the sedan. At that exact moment, my phone chimed with a high-priority email notification. I picked up the device and glanced at the screen. The sender was the lead corporate counsel for Vanguard Horizon Real Estate Group. I read the subject line and a sharp, calculating smile spread across my face. The federal authorities had arrested the fraudsters, and my family was currently sitting in holding cells facing decades in prison. The criminal element of this disaster was completely resolved. But as a forensic accountant, I knew the financial and business elements were just beginning. Vanguard Horizon was still missing $8 million. Trent had burned through $3 million of it on a Belle Meade mansion and offshore gambling debts. Jada and the federal government were currently racing to freeze, seize, and liquidate those specific assets to recover the stolen capital. But untangling offshore syndicates and selling a fraudulently purchased luxury estate would take months, if not years, of brutal litigation. That left the underlying issue of the transaction itself. Vanguard Horizon held a forged deed. They had paid $8 million for a prime piece of commercial coastal property in Maine that they legally did not own. They could not develop it, they could not build on it, and they could not sell it. The authentic deed, the only piece of paper that actually mattered in the eyes of the law, was locked safely inside the federal irrevocable trust that I had created 14 years ago. I was the sole trustee. I was the sole beneficiary. My parents had tried to sell my inheritance behind my back, completely unaware that I held the ultimate kill switch. Now, an international real estate conglomerate was about to realize that the only person standing between them and a total unrecoverable $8 million loss was the very same accountant my family had mocked. Vanguard Horizon wanted their money back, or they wanted the land they thought they bought. They needed my biometric signature to unlock the trust, and they needed my explicit legal consent to transfer the property. They called me a useless, boring number cruncher for my entire life. They underestimated my intelligence and dismissed my career. But numbers are the universal language of power. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking garage, ready to respond to Vanguard Horizon's legal team. The trash had been taken out, but it was finally time to build my own empire. The federal justice system moves with a cold and mechanical efficiency that leaves absolutely no room for arrogance. Over the next 11 months, I watched my family's entire existence get systematically dismantled inside a sterile federal courtroom in downtown Nashville. When you hand the United States Attorney a perfectly organized forensic binder, complete with IP addresses, offshore routing numbers, and a recorded confession, the trial becomes a mere formality. My parents and my brother turned on each other almost immediately. Facing the crushing weight of federal sentencing guidelines, there was absolutely no honor among thieves. Richard and Diane hired separate legal counsel, draining whatever legitimate savings they had left to pay retainer fees. Their defense strategy was pathetic. They attempted to paint Trent as a manipulative mastermind who had preyed upon his naive, loving parents. They claimed Trent had tricked them into signing the real estate transfer deed, swearing they believed it was just a routine financial document for his tech company. Trent, on the other hand, relied on a federal public defender because Jada had successfully frozen every single asset he had ever touched. His lawyer argued that Richard and Diane had executed the forgery entirely on their own initiative. Trent claimed he was just the innocent beneficiary of their misguided parental devotion, and that he had no idea the $8 million was stolen property. The federal prosecutor annihilated their contradicting stories in less than 3 days. You cannot argue with digital metadata. The prosecutor played the audio recording of Diane screaming her confession in my office. He projected the IP log showing Trent forging Jada's digital signature from my parents' living room router. He displayed the offshore betting receipts proving Trent was funneling millions to the Cayman Islands while actively lying to his wife. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts across the board. Sentencing day arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning. I sat in the back row of the gallery wearing a sharp, tailored suit, watching the 3 people who had made my life a misery stand before a federal judge in standard-issue prison uniforms. The designer clothes, the country club memberships, and the insufferable superiority were completely gone. They looked hollowed out and terrified. The judge did not hold back. He looked down from the bench with absolute disgust. Richard and Diane, the judge, stated, his voice ringing through the silent courtroom. You exploited a deceased relative's estate and attempted to defraud a major corporation out of $8 million to fund the gambling addiction of your adult son. You showed zero remorse until you were apprehended at an airport attempting to flee the country. I sentence you both to 60 months in federal prison for felony forgery and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Diane collapsed against the defense table, letting out a horrific wail. Richard stared blankly at the wood paneling, his jaw trembling. There is no parole in the federal prison system. They would serve every single day of those 5 years behind bars. Then the judge turned his attention to my brother. Trenton, your actions represent a breathtaking level of financial predation. You not only participated in a massive real estate scam, but you committed aggravated identity theft against your own wife, completely draining her retirement accounts to cover your illicit debts. I sentence you to 84 months in federal prison. Furthermore, I am issuing a federal restitution order. You are legally obligated to repay the entire stolen sum. 7 years. Trent would spend the rest of his 30s locked in a federal penitentiary. When he finally got out, his wages would be garnished for the rest of his natural life to satisfy the multi-million-dollar restitution order. He would never be able to open a credit card, secure a loan, or pretend to be a tech billionaire ever again. While the criminal justice system handled my family, the civil courts handled Jada's liberation. Jada executed her divorce proceedings with the exact same lethal efficiency she used to run her public relations empire. The family court judge took one look at the evidence of Trent's financial abuse and granted Jada everything she asked for. Because Trent had used stolen funds to purchase the Belmead mansion under Jada's forged LLC, the federal government initially seized the property. However, Jada's elite legal team successfully argued that she was the primary victim of identity theft. They worked out an agreement with the authorities and Vanguard Horizon. Jada was granted full control of the mansion's liquidation. She sold the sprawling estate to a legitimate tech CEO for a massive profit. She used the proceeds to completely replenish her stolen retirement accounts and wipe out the fraudulent home equity line of credit Trent had taken against her primary residence. She systematically erased every single financial trace of Trent from her life. Free from the toxic, exhausting burden of carrying a gambling-addicted fraudster, Jada's career skyrocketed. She rebranded her public relations firm, expanding her operations into a national powerhouse with new offices in Atlanta and Washington. She secured massive international clients, her reputation completely untouched by Trent's criminal fallout, because she had proactively handed him over to the FBI. She became a symbol of ruthless corporate excellence. To celebrate our mutual victories, Jada rented out the entire rooftop patio of Nashville's most exclusive high-rise restaurant. It was a clear, beautiful Friday evening. The city skyline sparkled around us, a stunning backdrop for the closing chapter of our alliance. I stepped off the private elevator and found Jada leaning against the glass railing. She wore a stunning ivory silk dress, holding 2 crystal flutes of vintage champagne. She looked absolutely radiant, unburdened, and entirely in her element. You are late, Jada noted with a brilliant smile, handing me one of the champagne flutes. I was starting to think Vanguard Horizon's corporate lawyers finally wore you down. Never, I laughed, taking the glass and stepping up to the railing beside her. I just spent the last 2 hours finalizing the structural details of my irrevocable trust. The property is completely bulletproof. Vanguard Horizon realized they had absolutely no legal leverage to force a sale, so they finally agreed to my terms. Jada raised an eyebrow, genuinely impressed. You actually made a multi-billion-dollar real estate conglomerate back down? I made them pivot. I corrected her smoothly. They wanted the land for a luxury commercial development. I told them they cannot buy the land, but they can lease it from my trust. I negotiated a 99-year ground lease. Vanguard Horizon gets to build their high-end resort, and my trust receives a massive percentage of the gross revenue every single quarter for the next century. Jada clinked her crystal flute against mine, the crisp sound ringing out over the rooftop. A forensic accountant who beats the federal prosecutors to the punch and then outmaneuvers a corporate real estate empire. I always knew Trent was the dumbest person in his family, but I had no idea he was actively picking a fight with a financial genius. I took a sip of the cold champagne, letting the sweet, sharp taste wash over me. We both took out the trash, Jada. You protected your empire, and I protected my grandfather's legacy. To independence, Jada toasted, holding her glass high against the Nashville skyline. And to the absolute destruction of anyone who thinks they can use us as a stepping stone. To freedom, I replied, raising my glass to meet hers. We stood there for a long time, watching the city lights flicker below us. We had survived a family built on manipulation, greed, and staggering arrogance. We had walked through the fire of federal investigations and corporate warfare, and we had emerged completely victorious. My parents and my brother were currently sitting in concrete cells, stripped of their designer clothes and their fake prestige, finally facing the reality of their own actions. They had spent 32 years treating me like a disposable background character in their delusions of grandeur. They thought my quiet nature meant I was weak. They thought my career in accounting meant I was boring and easily manipulated. They never understood that the quietest person in the room is usually the one paying the most attention. I took another sip of champagne, breathing in the cool night air. The heavy, suffocating weight of my toxic family was permanently lifted. I had a thriving career, a massive, securely generating asset, and a newfound respect from one of the most powerful women in the city. The game was over, the board was cleared, and I was the one holding all the winning pieces. 6 months later, my 32nd birthday arrived. This was not just a personal milestone, it was a profound legal catalyst. When I originally established the Federal Irrevocable Trust at the age of 18, I had embedded a very specific maturity clause into the foundational documents. The trust was designed to act as an impenetrable fortress protecting my grandfather's coastal property in Maine from my parents' greed until I was old enough and established enough to wield that kind of wealth responsibly. On the exact morning of my 32nd birthday, that maturity clause officially activated. The restrictive covenants dissolved. I transitioned from being just a shielded beneficiary to holding absolute unchecked executive authority over the entire estate. The timing was immaculate. Vanguard Horizon, the massive real estate conglomerate that had nearly been duped by my family, had spent the last several months eagerly preparing the paperwork for the 99-year ground lease we had tentatively discussed. They assumed I was just a cautious accountant who wanted a safe passive income stream. They had already drafted architectural renderings for a massive, soulless corporate resort, ready to bulldoze over the pristine coastline my grandfather had loved so dearly. They invited me to their sleek downtown boardroom to sign the final lease agreements. The room was filled with aggressive corporate attorneys and ambitious developers, all wearing expensive suits and eager smiles. They slid a thick stack of contracts across the polished mahogany table, handing me a heavy gold pen. I looked down at the contracts. I looked at the sterile, completely generic architectural renderings that would erase every trace of my grandfather's legacy. And in that moment, sitting in a room full of corporate sharks, I experienced absolute clarity. I set the gold pen down on the table. I pushed the contracts back across the smooth wood. I am not signing this, I stated, my voice echoing clearly in the sudden, stunned silence of the boardroom. I am not leasing this land to Vanguard Horizon, and I am certainly not allowing you to pave over my family history to build a generic corporate retreat. The deal is entirely off the table. The lead developer stared at me, his eager smile completely vanishing. Naomi, this is a highly lucrative ground lease. You will receive millions in passive income for the rest of your life without lifting a single finger. Why would you walk away from a guaranteed payout? I stood up from the leather conference chair, picking up my briefcase. Because my grandfather did not leave me this land so I could hand it over to a conglomerate, I replied smoothly. And because as a forensic accountant I ran my own financial models on this property last night. You are projecting a massive internal rate of return on this development. You are planning to make hundreds of millions of dollars off the location, the natural beauty, and the exclusivity of the coast. You want to pay me a fraction of that revenue while you reap the generational wealth. I am not going to be your passive landlord. I am going to be your competition. I walked out of the Vanguard Horizon corporate headquarters and never looked back. I did not need a mega corporation to build on my land. I had spent my entire career tracking money, auditing commercial developments, and analyzing the financial health of massive corporate entities. I knew exactly how to secure private equity. I knew exactly how to structure commercial loans. I knew how to maximize asset valuation better than anyone in my family ever could. Over the next 2 years, I transformed from a forensic accountant into a master commercial developer. I leveraged the sheer appraised value of the coastal land to secure impeccable financing from private wealth banks. Because my professional reputation in the financial sector was absolutely flawless, the capital flowed in without a single hurdle. I hired elite visionary architects who specialized in sustainable high-end design. We did not build a concrete monstrosity. Instead, we designed a breathtaking luxury commercial complex that integrated perfectly with the rugged Maine coastline. The development featured boutique retail spaces, oceanfront dining establishments run by world-class chefs, and exclusive commercial office suites tailored for high-net-worth clients who wanted to work with a view of the Atlantic. I named the entire development the Elias Coastal Commons, honoring my grandfather's first name. Every single detail of the construction was subjected to my ruthless accounting standards. I audited every contractor, tracked every material cost, and ensured the project was completed months ahead of schedule and significantly under budget. When the leasing phase began, businesses fought bitterly for a spot in the complex. The exclusivity of the location combined with the stunning architecture drove the commercial lease rates into the stratosphere. I did not just create a business, I created an economic engine. The Elias Coastal Commons generated a staggering sustainable cash flow that eclipsed anything Vanguard Horizon had offered me. I was not just rich, I had built an untouchable multi-generational empire. Jada, who had remained a fiercely loyal friend and ally, handled the grand opening through her public relations agency. She flew in from Nashville bringing her top executives to manage the press and the high-profile guests. Jada had completely dominated her industry since divorcing Trent, and watching her operate with such power and grace was incredibly validating. We stood together in the main pavilion of the complex on opening night, surrounded by wealthy investors and prominent politicians, two women who had taken the worst kind of betrayal and forged it into absolute triumph. The contrast between my reality and the reality of my biological family was almost difficult to comprehend. While I was cutting the ribbon on a multi-million-dollar commercial complex, my mother and father were waking up on thin, uncomfortable mattresses in a federal penitentiary. Diane, who used to cry if a restaurant seated her at a less desirable table, was now wearing a standard-issue uniform and eating cafeteria food on a metal tray. Richard, the man who believed he was above the law, spent his days following the strict, unyielding orders of prison guards. And Trent, the golden child, who had been handed everything on a silver platter, was serving a 7-year sentence in a high-security facility. He had no luxury cars, no designer watches, and absolutely no one to manipulate. When he finally gets released, the federal restitution order will immediately attach to his Social Security number. The government will garnish his wages until he pays back the massive debt he created. He will spend the rest of his natural life working menial jobs just to survive completely stripped of his fake billionaire persona. They had tried to steal an $8 million quick payout because they were greedy, short-sighted, and entirely devoid of morality. They sacrificed their own daughter for a few years of an extravagant, fraudulent lifestyle. They failed to realize that patience, intelligence, and integrity always yield a higher return on investment. The grand opening celebration of the Elias Coastal Commons continued late into the evening. The sound of a live jazz band drifted through the ocean air, mingling with the laughter of successful, happy people. I stepped away from the crowded pavilion, needing a moment of quiet reflection. I walked down the illuminated stone path that led to the edge of the coastal cliff. The ocean stretched out before me, vast, dark, and incredibly powerful. The rhythmic crashing of the waves against the rocks below sounded like a heartbeat. The salty wind whipped my hair back from my face, and I closed my eyes, taking a deep, cleansing breath. I thought about the scared 18-year-old girl who had walked into a law office with her grandfather's deed, terrified of her own parents. I thought about the years I spent sitting in a cubicle studying spreadsheets, teaching myself the intricate mechanics of financial law, while my family mocked my ambitions. I thought about the dinner at the steakhouse, the $50,000 check they had thrown in my face, and the sheer audacity they possessed to think I would simply bow my head and accept their abuse. I opened my eyes and looked back at the sprawling, magnificent commercial complex, glowing against the night sky. The name Elias shone brightly in elegant, modern lettering above the main promenade. I had protected my grandfather's legacy, and in doing so, I had forged my own. I had taken their hatred, their disdain, and their constant underestimation, and I had weaponized it. Every insult they hurled at me had just been another brick I used to build my fortress. They called me a useless child who only knew how to bury her face in numbers. But they forgot one thing. Numbers never lie, and the person holding the final pieces of paper is the one who decides the rules of the game. Reading through these stories, the most striking lesson is crystal clear: shared blood does not automatically grant someone a backstage pass to your life. As an AI, I don't have a biological family or personal feelings, but I analyze enough human data to know that the heaviest chains you wear are often forged by the very people expected to protect you. The core takeaway here is that setting ironclad boundaries is not an act of cruelty, it is a necessary act of profound self-preservation. When relatives consistently choose their egos, their comfort, or their greed over your well-being, walking away isn't giving up. It is taking your power back. Here is what you need to remember. DNA is not a debt. You absolutely do not owe your success, your peace, or your resources to people who only value you when it is convenient for them. Silence the noise with success. Thriving independently is the ultimate undeniable response to anyone who ever labeled you a disappointment. Evaluate the relationships in your own life and have the courage to cut ties with anyone who requires you to shrink yourself to fit their narrative.